starting a whole new exciting year for the history of the Edge, on the Edge cycle of lectures. And our first guest is Dr. Julie Gottlieb, professor of modern history at the University of Sheffield. She has written a lot extensively on the history of women and politics in Britain, including monographs entitled Feminine Fascism, Women in Britain's Fascist Movement, then Guilty Women, Foreign Policy and Appeasement in Interwar Britain, and many edited collections and articles. Her current research focuses on mental health fallout in Britain of the international crisis and the coming of the Second World War. Dr. Julie Gottlieb is interested also in the impact of international crisis and diplomatic decisions on the public opinion, emotions, and perception of crisis. She was awarded a Wellcome Seed Award for Suicide Society in Crisis in 2018 and 19, and right now she's a Leverhulme Research Fellow for Britain's War of Nerves, 1938-1940, and she's here today to present her collaborative research project on the nervous state, which resulted not only into an article or a book, as we are somehow used to, but into a dramatization of the topic made by Nicolo Baldwin, first as a play and now as a film. And she's going to show her this short film afterwards, after her lecture. Julie, I'm really honored that we have you here, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me, Meta, and it's a great opportunity to continue a collaboration that started, indeed, at the Symposium for the Suicide Society in Crisis. So always good to talk and to network in every possible way. So thank you so much. So a thank you to the Institute of Contemporary History here for the opportunity today to give you some insight and to speak to you about what we call a knowledge exchange project. I'll go a little more deeply into the terminologies later, that has emerged from my research on Britain's War of Nerves from 1938 to 1940, and it's culminated in this collaboration with writer-filmmaker Nicolo Baldwin. Now, over the past 3 years, Nicolo Baldwin and I have joined forces and married minds, creatively, intellectually, and emotionally. First to create a stage play, and now a short film that dramatizes F.L. Lucas's journal Under the Terror 1938, which was published in 1939. Now, in the second part of this session, as Meta already promised, I'll be showing you the fruits, hopefully the rich fruits of this collaboration and of our labors, and that will be Nicolo Baldwin's short film, which is called The Nervous State. So, on the 31st of December, 1937, F.L. Lucas, known as Peter, undertook to keep a journal for 1 calendar year. This most personal and intimate literary form was, paradoxically, always intended for a public audience, and the journal was scheduled for publication upon completion by Castle and Company, which was one of his regular publishers. Now, Peter Lucas must, of course, have predicted that 1938 would be an eventful year in politics for all the wrong reasons. Although a Cambridge Fellow in Classics and English Literature, indeed he was one of the first lecturers in the newly established Department of English Literature at Cambridge, he was also politically engaged, and he lived very much in the here and now. So we have to assume that kind of ivory tower notion doesn't fit for him. He was a committed internationalist and anti-fascist. He was a vocal critic of the national government's, the British national government's foreign policy, namely the piecemeal decisions or absence of resolve that would come to be called the policy of appeasement. He was also a staunch defender of artistic and intellectual freedom as essential for the defense of Western civilization as he saw it, rooted in this polymath's profound understanding of the classical tradition. Now, long relegated to the remainders bin of history, how F.L. Lucas's journal Under the Terror, 1938, made its journey from print in 1939 to stage in 2022, and now to screen in 2024, is a story in and of itself. And I mix my metaphors with intent here. While Lucas's journal received some critical attention upon its publication in July 1939, so note just a month or so before the outbreak of war, a not modest number of copies of the journal were sold. It is nonetheless by now an almost completely forgotten source, a rare book, in part because the publisher, Castle & Co.'s warehouse, was bombed in the Blitz, and any copies that remained of his journal went up in that inferno. But that is tangible as well as metaphoric, as we're going to see. So how did I come across this largely obscured text? Well, my discovery of his journal was by chance, as much of our research often is. It was mentioned obliquely in the wartime journal of Bloomsbury socialite and pacifist Frances Partridge. As if in passing, in her diary called A Pacifist's War, Frances Partridge recorded that she couldn't sleep one night. It was about 4 a.m. in the morning, and at that point, as she said, I got out Peter Lucas's diary of the September crisis and read it while the wind rattled in the curtains. Well, that was enough to rattle the wind in my curtains of curiosity. And working as I was at that time on the history from below of appeasement, and taking that the emotional turn in my own research, I was very interested indeed how ordinary people experienced and internalized the international crisis. So I was intrigued by this journal, whose ominous title portended a great deal of relevance as well. All right, so there are very few intimate accounts of the crisis of 1938, and here clearly there was one that did not only exist but had been published at the time. So Lucas's journal mainly tells his own story of his travels and his thoughts against the backdrop of pivotal world events. However, coinciding with the Munich crisis, his wife Prudence, who I will refer to as Prudence or Prudy, experienced a nervous breakdown, and she was hospitalized. Both Peter and Prudence, therefore, we can only surmise, internalized the crisis, and then they projected, especially he did, projected these psychiatric and psychoanalytical diagnoses onto the world as a whole. So let me tell you a little bit about the background of this collaboration with Nicolo Baldwin and the circumstances, institutional and political, that have mostly nurtured but sometimes thwarted our knowledge exchange and our collaboration. So first, let's go a few years back. I was researching the intimate and psychological responses of ordinary people to the international crisis, and in particular to the varied but deeply visceral responses that people had to those roller coaster weeks of September 1938, when Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain visited Hitler on 3 occasions, famously, culminating in the 3rd visit to Munich and the sealing of the Four Powers Conference, when the decision was assigned for the dismemberment of Czechoslovakia. While much of the world rejoiced that peace had been preserved, Peter Lucas knew the terrible price that had been paid and the total hollowness of Chamberlain's promise that this meant peace for our time. As luck would have it, I found a copy of Lucas's rare book on Amazon, and I did immediately wonder how this would change the course of my own research. It was still in an earlier moment of research. And although Lucas was well known in his own time as a scholar, as a public intellectual, as a prolific man of letters, and his journal was published by a reputable publisher, as I've already said, it had garnered very few reviews at the time, and inexplicably to me, it had not stood the test of time. So the journal had not been admitted into any canon of confessional sources, any ego documents, or chronicles. So that's why I say I kind of rediscovered this source. It's a published source, but still it's been kind of recaptured, rediscovered. And when I did rediscover it, it was a real revelation. Here was a source that, on the one hand, was so very candid, eloquent, poetic, and acute about the strain and impact on the self of the international crisis and that countdown to the Second World War. In contrast, though, the whole format was a conceit. Here was the most intimate form of writing, a diary being prepared for immediate publication as the year 1938 came to a close. The narrator was therefore unreliable, protective of his own privacy and the privacy of others, defensive of his own reputation, no doubt. The writing process and the style could hardly have been spontaneous or stream of consciousness, but rather it was much more affected, self-censored, rewritten, or at least that was my assumption. Although it's interesting to note that Lucas made a very punctuated point at the beginning of the published journal to say that he had not revisited this, he had not edited it in light of later events. Nonetheless, what I immediately grasped that Lucas's story told a gripping story, what I would call a micro-history of the War of Nerves. Now, just as serendipitously was the way that Nicolo Baldwin and myself came together. I could never have predicted that the journey that we've taken would have happened in the way that we've tried to rescue Lucas's journal from what I think was an undeserved obscurity. As importantly, it has been incredibly rewarding, emotionally and professionally, to be able to breathe life into this most prescient intellectual and political critic, as well as to his otherwise and even more forgotten, but clearly just as brilliant wife, Prudence. And keep in mind that my background is as a women's historian, so this was always one of the main kind of aims, objectives, and part of the mission. So in the autumn of 2019, I shared my discovery and my excitement about Lucas's journal with Nicolo Baldwin over coffee the day after the premiere performance of her historical fiction play, We the Young Strong. This play, We the Young Strong, was staged at the Bloomsburyya Theatre in London. And then Nicola's play told the story of a working class girl who became a devoted member of Sir Oswald Mosley's British Union of Fascists. As mentioned, my first monograph was indeed on women in British fascism, feminine fascism, and this Nicola turned to this for much of her research. And as a result, she invited me onto a post-performance panel discussion after the play. The next day we met for coffee, mid-November 2019, and it was clear that, and I pitched her the Lucas story. And it was clear that she shared my fascination about his journal. She heard, too, the striking resonances with our own period of crisis, and she saw the dramatic potential of developing the Lucas's story. Now, we shared a desire to breathe life into Peter Lucas and to make sense of his darkening mood and his increasingly trying personal circumstances in the course of that pivotal year. But as importantly, as two women in our fields, as two feminist practitioners, we were both inspired by P in the journal. Now, if I haven't made that clear already, Prudence was only ever referred to as P by her first initial in Lucas's journal. Why? Well, notionally, this was to leave her a shred of privacy in an otherwise emotional expose. Not only had she been anonymized this way, or virtually anonymized, but even as P, she was only referred to about a dozen times in the pages of this visceral chronicle, and there are 367 pages in which she appears only, as I say, maximum a dozen times. So who was Prudence? How did this impressive young Girton College graduate come to marry a Cambridge Don, her senior by almost a generation? He's 17 years older. Why did she experience a nervous breakdown, just as the world was having a collective nervous breakdown? Were external events the trigger for her mental illness? Had she been protected, or rather had she actually been erased by being largely written out of her husband's journal? If erased, was Lucas exercising some kind of patriarchal dominance here? Was he lording over her? Was he oppressing her with his sexual privilege? Or was he in fact respecting her privacy and struggling to find ways to keep her, to help her and to find effective psychiatric treatment for her. So we definitely wanted together, playwright and historian, to try to find Dear Prudence, and I haven't been able to get that lyric from the Beatles song out of my head since, to give her a voice and to rescue her from the anonymity to which she was destined. Anonymity to which she was destined by dint of her sex, but more importantly, I think, by her, and I say apparent mental illness, and we can talk about that question mark a little later. So playwright and historian wanted to ask very similar questions and bring the tools of our respective vocations along to excavate the Lucas's very private, but also their very universal story. Their story struck a chord on so many different registers. Peter had opened the door for us by leaving behind this journal, by giving us insight into his own psychodrama. So short months after Nicola and my first discussions, of course the world shifted on its axis, and the pandemic interrupted our creative flow. In hindsight, however, this global and all-consuming crisis gave us more reason than ever to dramatize the journal. With the support of the University of Sheffield's COVID Recovery Fund, we were able to concretize the collaboration. Nicola wrote the play, and she directed the first read-through performance that took place at the Montgomery Theatre in Sheffield in June 2022. In retrospect, the process was one of recovery on many levels. What do I mean by this? Well, it was the rehabilitation, as we've already discussed, of a lost text. It rescued the Lucases from the forgetfulness of the past. It was a recuperation in the sense that it was about Peter's own efforts to treat Prudence's mental illness by consulting leading refugee psychoanalyst Willem Steckel, who I mentioned, and I'm happy to talk more about him in the discussion. How else is it a recuperating exercise? Peter's drive to heal the world and save it from fascism was an attempt of recovery of treatment. But on a more personal level, for Nicola and myself, the whole project was a way of finding psychological and emotional recovery from lockdown through this artistic collaboration. Consequently, it would quickly become apparent why we titled the play and now the film The Nervous State. And hopefully there are many resonances from that. On the one hand, the title speaks for Peter's journey as a diarist and the couple's journey from relative health, happiness, and creative productivity to mental health crisis, bewilderment, and the stagnation of the imagination. On the other hand, they were not alone in internalizing this all-consuming crisis. In 1938, that year of accelerating world crisis, the language of nervous disorder, psychiatric dysfunction, and the psychoanalytic solutions were being constantly projected onto the collective level and onto the state itself. And Lucas is one of the narrators who participates in that projection. As Lucas himself put it, his world was threatened with an epidemic of nervous breakdowns and the general spread of neuroticism. The nervous state, therefore, interrogates how the course of world history transforms the individual. Dramatizing Lucas's words and reconstructing Prudy's breakdown, or her alleged breakdown, in a world of nervous breakdowns, places at center stage what too often takes place behind the scenes in historical drama, and in historical writing, namely how crises are internalized by ordinary people. Furthermore, too often, those who have suffered from mental illness have been absent from the archive, as to build on the discussion we were having over lunch, Meta, and they are hidden from history, of course, and they're hidden from view. Indeed, rescuing Prudence's experience as a woman and as a woman suffering from mental illness is a way of representing the marginalized and the minoritized, to repurpose a current fashionable word. So writing the journal for a readership also meant that the private world that Lucas inhabited was made public, that he was unintentionally or maybe subconsciously writing a public history of his wife's mental illness. So Peter and Prudie are not ordinary in the strictest sense of the word, of course. It's true that Peter was exceptional. He was highly educated, well-connected, privileged. Prudie was just as exceptional on her own merits. She had been born into an influential family, originally Irish gentry, who made their legal careers in Shanghai and were part of the whole imperial establishment. She was then educated privately back in Scotland for a few years and then got a scholarship to Girton College, Cambridge. Interestingly enough, she would have been studying just at the time when the alter ego of Virginia Woolf writes the seminal text, A Room of One's Own, which came out in 1929. So that gives us a sense of the flavor and the experience of what it was like as a Girton undergraduate at the precise moment she was there. In fact, Bloomsbury figures in the Lucas story are quite present. Virginia Woolf, who is an acquaintance, I would say friend, but that would be overstating it slightly, writes in her diary how angry she is with Peter Lucas for publishing his journal and for thoughtlessly exposing his wife. So there are traces of responses to his journal that way, rather than through kind of critical engagement. Indeed, I use the term a history from within to describe the methods and hopefully the slightly fresh insights that can be gained from telling this intimate history of the international crisis, this internalization of international history. Fittingly, let me also take you behind the scenes of the making of the play and the film a little bit. So allow me to say a few things about the collaborative process and how we have gone about bringing Prudence's and Peter's story to diverse audiences, how making, again, these very private histories public. So why the play? What have we been trying to achieve? And I'm going to be just a little bit more kind of point form here because I don't want to take up too much time before you actually get to watch this film. Why did we decide to make the film? Why the play? Why the film? Well, it definitely involved kind of thinking outside the box, getting emotional access in a way that historians cannot otherwise get, kind of embedding, therefore, kind of emotional literacy, mental health literacy into our own work, both as historian and as dramatist. I think it was a way, this was the only way I could think of kind of recreating what we might call what others have called an emotional community by approaching historical sources in this way. There were certain things we were worried about, of course, too. The forensic diagnosis of mental illness was a real kind of sticking point. Our own kind of ethical considerations and challenges. In the university, we do have to go through ethics approval. So on the first surface of it, these things were addressed. But actually, on a more kind of deeper level, the question was how far can we go to kind of making these diagnoses, certainly without any professional qualifications, even when dealing with psychologists and psychiatrists who we did consult and who were project partners, what were the ethical boundaries there? And how do we kind of negotiate these as artist and as historian? So what I think became more and more of a concern, again for historian and for writer, was that we shouldn't sensationalize Peter and Prudence's pain. We shouldn't sensationalize their psychological suffering. They weren't ours to make a project of. We owed them dignity, privacy, respect. But that didn't mean we had to shut down the project, but we had to, because of course that was not the way to do it, but we had to keep those considerations very foremost in our minds. This included, one way of doing this was to, again, make it much more historical, to learn more about the role of Willem Steckel in their story, and to dig deeper into that history. Not only did we do this as a play and then a film, but we started working with schools and working with high school students in particular. As I mentioned earlier, the reason that this project ever came about or was given the funding it did is that it's considered a knowledge exchange project. It's part of the whole kind of impact agenda in British universities. Maybe some of you heard of the REF, the Research Excellence Framework, which comes out every 6 to 7 years. And in the last 3 REFs, there's, well, the third one coming, 25% of how we're evaluated in terms of our work and prestige markers and the impact and the achievement of our research is impact, okay? So this word impact, transformative impact. So easy enough to prove transformative impact if you're working in oncology and you're developing cancer drugs. A little harder to do if you're in history or the humanities, as we can imagine. But the cultural impact is game here, and that's why the university supported us, why there's funding available for knowledge exchange, because it will become possibly another impact case study, and as such, the university will benefit from it, not only culturally and in terms of prestige and in terms of the satisfaction of having supported the arts, but it will be weighed and measured, and there will be monetary value associated with it too. So as I say, we working with school children and high school students was another way of trying to bring new audiences to this project and make it accessible, interesting, and transformative, well beyond the confines of academia. So I've given you a bit of a timeline of the project. I'm not going to go over that in any further detail, but I'm happy to go through the stages a little later. But let me just give some concluding remarks before we move on. So Nicolo Baldwin's deeply evocative film, I think, does far more than stage Lucas's journal. Its origins are in the imaginative co-production and marriage of minds between playwright and historian. Indeed, what we have here is a writer writing about a writer, and a historian writing about a writer who fancied himself a historian and a chronicler of his age. We then went on to connect with the descendants and the protagonists to know them in ways that we could have never discovered from archives or the printed page alone. We conducted research online and in archives to fill the gaps in Lucas's story, some gaps that he left intentionally, others that are there because writer and reader don't always think the same things are relevant or important. And over the past month, so the film was made in February, the filming started in February of this year. Over the past months, the most talented and passionate cast and crew, working usually on a shoestring budget and giving their passion as the main reward, brought Peter and Prudence's stories to us. They brought these two figures to life again, or at least they did so in a highly plausible and relatable fashion. So the Nervous Strait has brought together people from the arts, filmmaking, the Stockport Garrick, which is a historic and over 100 years old amateur dramatics society, people from the heritage industry, from the community, from schools, as I said, and our own families. What for? Well, to rethink and to recast this rediscovered primary source, and to do so in a way that we can hear it speak for his own age. But more importantly, I think, we feel it can speak powerfully to us in our present state of permacrisis. And it was just absolute luck that the Collins Dictionary word of the year in 2022 was indeed permacrisis, which gave us that immediacy and that relevance, I hope. So please join me now as we enter the nervous state. I'd be delighted for your questions and for any feedback after you've watched this 19-minute film. So thank you.
Thank you for showing us. This is a pre-premiere. It hasn't been aired yet. Maybe you can share some information about this.
Yes, thank you. It's the first public performance. We've had two so-called, I'm totally new to this world, we had two cast and crew screenings, one in Stockport, because most of the filming was done in Stockport, and we had another one in London. but those were kind of closed screenings, mainly for the cast and crew and selected friends. This is the first a public screening. We have the next screening, the kind of premiere or preview screening at the Wiener Library in London on the 30th of September. The date was not at all coincidental. It will be the 86th anniversary, of course, of the Munich Agreement. And then we have another event in Sheffield on the 17th of October. So you are the first guinea pigs, I suppose. And Nicolo Baldwin, by the way, was hoping she might be able to join us today and could have spoken for her own kind of journey. But she's certainly interested in hearing through me what you have to say, or maybe it's being recorded as well, so I can share that with her. So don't say anything mean. No, I'm joking. I can't imagine you would. There's nothing more valuable to an artist than to hear what the audience has to say. So thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Maybe we'll take some questions from the audience. If someone would like to ask something.
Or share impressions, whatever.
Yeah. Or maybe I'll just start and warm up a little. Could you possibly give us a general overview of this impact of this international crisis? What was this a perception of individuals who maybe knew too much, who were reading too much, or was this generally spread in the society, this fear of this war that is about to explode?
Yeah, thank you very much. And as I said, Lucas's experience is unique, but absolutely universal at the same time. And why I was so drawn to his journal, and why when I found it, it was just a treasure trove of material, because he was articulating what fears, experience, again, the internalization of crisis, which I saw evidence of in so many other fields and so many other moments and milieus and experiences, but he was giving it he, as I say, he was narrating it in a very coherent way, coherent and incoherent, because he sets out to write this project sets out to keep this journal mainly as an intellectual and political journal, and with some insight into his own kind of creative process, because he's a writer in every genre. He's as we see here. And of course, Nicolo Baldwin pulled out that strand of him as a playwright, because that spoke most to her as a playwright, and that's how she connected most with Lucas. But so he's a playwright, he's a novelist, he's a travel writer, he's writing a lot of journalism at this time. So he's fighting the demons of the crisis with the pen rather than the sword. He's giving it that kind of meaning, imposing that meaning, articulating that meaning, but it is being experienced everywhere else. And there are a lot of other sources which give us some insight into that, but not in this, as I say, this kind of coherent and eventually deliberate kind of way. So there are many. If you were a social historian of the political crisis, I've used a lot of mass observation sources. So mass observation was this social research, experimental social research organization that was established only in 1937. It was established at the very same time as opinion polling came to Britain, was imported. So Gallup, the American Gallup, was imported and kind of franchised in Britain also at the beginning of 1937. So these two very different methods of trying to ascertain and capture public opinion started at the same time. Mass observation is much more experimental. Its founders are Cambridge dropouts, so Cambridge figures again here. One is a surrealist filmmaker, very much using the kind of techniques, sometimes very kind of popularized techniques of psychoanalysis and so forth, to make sense of what people are feeling, what they're saying, what knowledge they have are exposed to and what they're not. It's run by volunteers. Volunteers go out and survey public opinion in a very kind of random way, but they also kind of encourage people to write diaries and keep diaries, or again, very much ordinary people, and then send in those diaries, and then the mass observation team comes together to kind of make sense of these. And in January 1939, Mass Observation publishes, written by Mass Observation, as a Penguin special, so very much intended for a mass audience. Penguins, for those of you who might need a reminder, they're the yellow, the orange banded books, which were paper, pocket books. They were meant to treat very, very timely, very contemporary events and get things out to a readership within months of events happening, even sometimes weeks. So this was, again, very much for a popular audience. And so Mass Observation is a great kind of archive of the emotional history of the crisis, but in a very much more haphazard, bits and pieces kind of way. So that interest is not confined to Lucas in any way, and again, we also see in every other possible way the kind of the mainstreaming of psychoanalytic discourse, dialogue, theory in so much in newspapers, in journals, in all kinds of kind of great, more popular sources too. So Lucas is kind of picking up on that, but in a more sophisticated way, and he's an absolutely voracious reader. He reads everything, and actually he develops an interest in Stekel. At the end of 1938, he finds a book by Stekel, and very quickly he actually finds Stekel himself. He takes, I think, Prudy for treatment, or tries to. That doesn't succeed, but he then develops a good friendship, a close friendship with Stekel, who doesn't have a lot of time left, and he's one of my crisis suicides. He takes his life in 1939 in London. And Stekel had been a disciple of Freud. He'd fallen out with Freud, like so many other disciples of Freud. But funnily enough, they end up in London within a couple of miles of each other that last year of their respective lives. So there's a lot of intertwining kind of life stories here. Anyway, Peter Lucas develops this friendship and fascination with Stekel and his work. And Peter and Prudy divorce, as you see. Prudy moves on for only a few years. I could talk about her death a little later from another response. Actually, Stekel introduces Peter to his third wife, the one he marries after Prudence, and they have 2 children. And I've been in touch with the son. So actually, much of a lot of important insights we have because his son has spoken to us. But as I say, in terms of how these emotions were experienced and how they were articulated and externalized, Peter is definitely not alone.
And when they collected all this data with this service,
Mass Observation,
how did the government react? Did they take any measurement to calm down the... Yeah,
so it's a really good question specific to Mass Observation. Mass Observation, as I say, is formed as a kind of almost, as an experimental, very anti-establishment kind of movement in early 1937. During the war itself, actually, they're co-opted by the government to monitor morale. And actually some of the founders and many of the members fall away from it and leave because it's departed so much from its original intention as an anti-fascist, pro-democratic organization, and then they don't want to be co-opted by the wartime repressive state.
Thank you so much for sharing this movie with us. I also appreciated your reflections on how it's as a historian to work with a playwright. I think it's something many of us aspire to do at some point in our lives. I wanted to ask you more about Prudence, specifically the kind of sources that you could access to reconstruct her story. My impression is that in the movie, it's very much intertwined to Peter's story. So I wonder if this has to do with the fact that your main source was in the end his diary. Yeah. And then maybe you talked a bit about this, but maybe you can tell us a bit more the kind of decisions you made in order to bring her story forward and a bit decouple it from the way that she's represented in the diary. Again, I really appreciated that at the end she has the last word. And I wondered again there, is this, because it's not her last word, right? It's the way that you wanted her to speak for herself. And I wonder how you made that decision for her to tell her story in that specific way.
Thank you. That's an excellent set of questions, all related, and very much really gets to the heart of the matter of the kind of issues that we faced creatively, historically, in terms of scholarly practice. So just to tell you the research journey here. So discovered Peter first, then I was who's this P, started to do research, then started to work. Couldn't find out very much about her at all. She had been really erased from the record. Because unlike him, who published dozens and dozens of volumes, and even if we had nothing else except for his oeuvre, we'd have a lot. With her, there was nothing. She co-wrote with him one book, From Olympus to the Styx, a travel book, which was actually quite popular. It came out in 1934, and it recounted their travels, because again, they're both classicists, and she was a Greek. She did Greek at Cambridge. She read Greek at Cambridge. She is an intellectual partner as well, clearly, even though the age difference and, of course, the other big gaps. But otherwise, there was nothing of her. Then it's all about books. It's all about buying books. It's all about the internet. So I got my book on Amazon, but that was kind of the last copy. I luckily got it for a fairly low price. Otherwise, I might never have actually taken the plunge to read it. Then I interested Nicola. She managed to find her copy on Abe Books and got it quite reasonably priced with the original jacket cover. What's it called? The book jacket. So that I didn't have that. And then she looked more on Abe Books, and she found someone selling a copy of Henry Miller, the American cause célèbre author, Tropic of Cancer. His next book was called Black Spring, and she found a copy of Black Spring being sold by a private individual, which was signed by the author with an annotation, a dedication to Prudence. And Prudence had gone, and at some point we're not quite clear how, she'd had an affair with Henry Miller. And she found this book, and she found that the person selling the book was Prudence's nephew. So Prudence had no children. As you saw, one of the themes in the film is that she wants children. He's worried about the world situation, but also about her mental health and whether she's motherhood would be advisable for her. So she never had children, but her sister had 3 children, and one of her nephews was selling this book. So we managed. Nicola reached out to him, and he responded, and we started speaking with him and then his half sister, who shared a lot, and I interviewed both of them. Especially the sister knew a lot more. And there was a real family fascination with this woman. They never met. She died in 1944. One of her nephews was born in 43, but never met. But she has this real mystique in the family, as we discovered. And then more recently, since the film was actually made, we came across another nephew who was actually her official heir, and there's an interesting kind of side story to all of that. So that's how we discovered Prudence. We were also put on to the fact that Prudence is mentioned in one other published source, which is Joan Wyndham's A Wartime Diary, or Love and Letters. So Joan Wyndham was a 17-year-old in 1939 who was an aspiring actress and artist. By the 1960s, she becomes this kind of bohemian, kind of matriarch in Soho in London. But so that was why people took an interest in her, the diaries that she kept during the war. She was 10 years, or even more than 10 years, Prudence's junior, but she became friends with her, and she wrote a lot about her in the journal. So actually much of what, and I shouldn't speak for Nicola, but she's not here, so I'll have to, much of the dialogue that we hear from Prudence, some of it is taken from extrapolations of what she must have been saying and the conversations they must have been having in the journal. But a lot of it, and especially that last scene where she speaks very much for herself, is taken directly from how Wyndham speaks of how Prudy talks about her marriage. So that's the very direct answer. And as I say, at various points we came across more people, but still there are probably 3 people in the world who know anything, still alive today, who know anything about her. And that, it's his son, who is the product of the 3rd marriage, knew a bit about her, sent us some of her work. She was trying to be an artist after finishing her degree. They got married very quickly after she finished her degree, like within months. She didn't decide to go on to academia. She wanted to be an artist. She was not particularly very good. I think I showed you one of the, I'm being judgmental there. Oh, sorry, that's not my slides. Anyway, she didn't succeed as an artist. He was very, very conservative when it came to aesthetics and artistic tastes and standards, and he probably held her back a lot. And he made her produce these very kind of anthropomorphic and representational little statuettes, which weren't going to go anywhere. Whereas she was clearly attracted to the avant-garde and to the bohemian kind of set, but he must have been a blocking figure for her in that sense. We can only, again, assume and extrapolate. He does say things in the journal about Dada artists. He has a real distaste for modernism. And actually, how Lucas has a negative kind of fame or an infamy, and the way he's remembered in literary history is not for any of the dozens of books that he wrote and his own critical work, but it's because he wrote the first review of T.S. Eliot's poem, The Wasteland. And he slated it, he hated it, and he said as much. It was in the New Statesman that he published this. So he kind of lived he didn't really live to regret it, because he really stood by his guns, that he was a vehement anti-modernist, a traditionalist, and very, again, conservative with a small c in his literary taste. So there's a lot of reasons why he fell out of fashion, why he has been forgotten. I could expand on that, but I won't go too far. But yeah, and so in terms of Prudy, it was trying to, again, as I've said, trying to find her voice, trying to recreate her. And, again, as some of you might hear me again tomorrow, it'll be too much in 2 days, but, I'm looking at these crisis suicides, these people who took her life. Now, she did die in 1944. She died, we're trying very hard to track down her death certificate. We're making inquiries with a research assistant of mine, but it's proving very difficult. She died in Port of Spain, Trinidad, at the beginning of 1944. She was obviously there on some kind of government work, civil service work, possibly, again, more intelligence work, not unlike her ex-husband, who really made, he was honored after the war for the work he did at Bletchley Park and as a cryptographer, so he really did get recognition for that. But anyway, she clearly had another breakdown, and again, I don't want to, she fell out of a window. So half the family is very reluctant to say it was suicide. The other half is saying, well, it seems to be. So again, we have to honor both sides of this and not make any kind of judgments or assumptions until we actually see the paperwork. But it was not ruled a suicide from what I can gather. But it must have been somehow related to her mental illness, I would assume. So yeah, so it was honoring her, as I say, not only as a kind of as a wife who but also, I think we started, both of us, and Nicola's very different on this for me, so I don't want to speak for her. I started very much sympathetic to Prudy, wanting to, kind of a feminist recuperation exercise of this woman's voice, and being very kind of anti-Peter, I suppose, assuming that he was some kind of, dominant figure and who'd somehow stifled her creativity and her presence and then as I got to know both of them better, I saw, I'll be kind of, it might be a little, kind of obvious or a little cliche, but I saw there was two sides to any story. And she clearly hurt him very deeply as well. She was, we know from other sources, it's quite clear she was, cheating on him, and he didn't take kindly to that. He wasn't into free love, and even though they were around Bloomsbury where everyone was sleeping with everyone, that wasn't that clear. He says that in different ways at different times. He's not interested in that kind of, relationship. So he's clearly quite hurt, humiliated, and angry with her. balanced with the fact that this might be a symptom of her mental illness as well in her breakdown. So, you know, we had a lot of kind of hot potatoes to deal with, and we dealt with them, again, artist and historian dealt with them somewhat differently. But often, I mean, the silos of being a writer and a historian had to be broken down as well, because, you know, Nicola does her own research, and she does as much history as any of us in some ways. And as we know, as historians, we're creative people too. We're writers. You know, we have to, you know, examine and we're allowed to examine and explore our own creativity, and not just be kind of tied down by our sources, I guess. Sorry, it's a really long answer to your question. But there was a second part. Did I address that?
I'm very happy with your answer.
Okay, all right.
Maybe other questions?
Just maybe, how went those cooperation between artist and historian? Because, of course, one is led by the licencia poetica and the other by sources. So, how many situations did you get on in which, for example, historian says this is maybe too much licencia poetica in some really typical situation in which the state of art or something like that went different? Because I ask you, because I was also advisor with some theater groups in here who always work those affairs of the Second World War and afterwards, and then the director engaged me to have some lectures for those theater players who will act some persons who are important in our political history.
Thank you. That's a really, really brilliant question, and I'd like to hear more about your experience too, because I'm sure there are quite a few overlaps. I think it's very, as I was saying, it was quite different working with a collaborator from the very beginning. So many of us as historians have probably been called upon by the media or by filmmakers. We are doing a historical thing. We just want to make sure that it's authentic and we got the costumes right, and you know the dialogue is plausible. You know, we'll give you money or no money, but you know we want all your knowledge. This was you know, again, I know it seems jargon, but it was a genuine knowledge exchange in that way. With Nicola, and we started working on this from the beginning. So it was, you know, it wasn't that one of us came into it later. So we had those discussions and those debates. They weren't always, we didn't always agree, but we were always, I think, we've always been, and we continue to be very respectful of the boundaries and the possibilities, but also the limitations of our respective fields. In some ways, probably I promoted a little more poetic license sometimes than she did, because I felt ultimately being able to work like this is freeing from the constraints under which we often work. I was more ready to kind of jump to conclusions about, say, the cause of, or the, you know, the meaning of Prudence's death, for instance. But if you remember the afterword, you know, she was very careful not to even insinuate, other than giving her that she died at such a young age. And also don't forget that we found out very late in the process that I got her other nephew, as I say, we were in touch, and her other nephew and his wife shared with me some of the last letters that Prudy sent to her mother. And they were just mind-blowing in what they revealed. And one of the things they revealed is that she had plans for the future. So they wasn't some kind, in some ways it wasn't a kind of rehearsed suicide note in any way, but she was very, very frank, very open about the fact she was going through another breakdown. So, you know, there are a lot of clues, but we're not allowed to, you know, both of us, I was, again, more ready to kind of read those clues for what I thought they were, whereas Nicola's like, no, we don't impose those judgments or those conclusions on the evidence. And as an artist, she doesn't have to. So it kind of goes back to what we're saying. She can insinuate. No one's going to say, well, what did you mean by that? You read it and you take it as you like, and that's the freedom that we don't have as historians, who have to spell it out, right? Whereas with art, you can insinuate, you can evoke, you can let people's imagination and fill in the rest for you. So I think to me that was the difference. So possibly I don't know if that's the same as your experience or an unexpected answer.
It was a different experience, as you mentioned. You started to work from the beginning. I was called when they were preparing a play which was written before.
Yeah. Thank you. And did you find that, was it frustrating? Like there were even, with our collaboration, there were frustrations.
It was not frustrating, it was very fine collaboration.
Excellent. Okay, good to hear. And is that encouraged here and within the academic kind of setting, or is there recognition for that kind of work, or it's just kind of accidental? Okay. Thank you.
Maybe from the movie, I got the impression that he too was falling apart in those days of tension, and maybe when the war finally started, it was some kind of a relief for him. Yes. Did I get the right?
I think
his
so.
diary stop before the war, or
it stopped? The whole project was to keep a diary for exactly 1 calendar year. So that's what he did. So the last day is the last day, and the second to last scene, 31st of December, 38. And it comes out in July 1939. He writes a little, not preface, but a little note at the front to say that I have not changed this. This is as I first recorded my experience. So, whether he's kind of, he doth protest too much, I don't know. But I think we have to take his word that indeed he didn't go back to edit it and to change it in light of current events. But he still found himself, he was still and almost entirely prophetic and accurate in what he predicted was going to happen, both politically but also emotionally. So I think he probably patted himself on the back, as we would say. I got this right, and now here it is, I'm sharing it with you. Again, the critical response was quite mixed. Some people appreciated, and other people, I think, a lot of it was, the kind of, we've all been here in some ways in our academic work. I think it came out when people were just saturated with this stuff. They just didn't want to hear it anymore. They were in it. They were in medias res, like they were in the middle of this. And he's also, but the other thing to say that, I did say he fancied himself a historian. He's a chronicler in a kind of almost medieval sense. And he refers, and more than, refers to classical, historical techniques. And he does say from the beginning, I'm writing this to be for historians of the future. He says that. He couldn't be more deliberate about it. Sometimes cloyingly, sometimes it's a little too much. But, I think we can only thank him for that. Like, he's very self-aware. He's over self-aware in every way. But he doesn't, even though he's, as you said, he's clearly having his own kind of breakdown, but it's a very rational breakdown, if you see what I mean. He is still a rationalist confronted by all this. Now, as I say, he becomes very influenced by Steckel. One of his important post-war critical editions is called Psychology and Literature. So he becomes really intimately interested in psychology and psychoanalysis, which he isn't at this stage, particularly other than in the wider sense. And of course, the whole bigger circle, the Bloomsburyites there, it's the Hogarth Press, run by Virginia and Leonard Woolf, that translates Freud's work to English for the first time. So, it's all in the same whirl of ideas and discourse. But yeah, I think the way that Peter Clements, the actor's name is Peter too, plays him, I think he, from what we found from what I found from speaking to the Sun, is that he was very typically English in his emotional comportment by the standards of that time. Very male, very English. He wouldn't have been someone who would have been emotionally expressive in public. So again, it's hard to know how to represent that.
Yeah, it's nice to hear that they think of us historians in advance.
Yes.
Maybe other questions, comments?
Can I just continue with what you just said? Thank you very much, otherwise, for a really interesting presentation and then screening, very screening for us. I think that the movie really nicely captures this anxious state of mind that everybody were in at the time. And I just wanted to ask, like, in what ways these emotions were seen in the diary, in the journal itself? Like, how did you manage to extract them from the text? If it was mostly political and intellectual text, so how much of those self-reflections are in there, and in what context actually prudence is mentioned?
Thank you. Really good questions. So, this film is part of the project. I wanted to make sure that, I'll answer it this way, but I will get there, I promise. So I wanted to make sure that Nicola's play, which is where we started, would be available. So I wrote a proposal and signed a contract with White Rose University Press, which is a university press that offers open access. And it's a 3-part book, which I've just finished the first part of a few weeks ago. First part is me as historian, writing about Lucas, writing about Prudy, and offering an exegesis of the journal. So a critical edition of the journal and a description, but also a contextualization of the journal. So that's written. The middle part is going to be Nicola's play, which is almost ready. And the third part is the more experimental part, and that's talking about the actual process of working together, mainly me and Nicola, but all our other partners, to kind of be a self-reflexive, self-reflective chapter and discussion, which might be of interest to other people, not just because they're interested in this specific project, but about the process that so many of us in British academia are expected to engage with. So that's that. The third part is a bit of a work in progress, but I have an imminent deadline, so I'm not going to make myself too nervous. And your question was about, remind me again, sorry, just I lost myself in my...
About emotions.
So in the exegesis of the journal, I think, so I've been reading it very carefully again, right, and to write about it. I think he has many masks, he has many faces, many voices in that journal. He starts it with the tone starts very differently. It's much more artistic and intellectual reflection, what he's reading, what it's making him think about, both in terms of current affairs, both in terms of literature, from Shakespeare to much more, contemporary literature. It's a pastiche of all of these things. P appears only a couple of times in the first, and mainly to say, we were on a trip. It's also a travel log in many ways, because they're really, really, they travel extensively. Don't forget, Gudrun is the play that he's written before, but it's performed for the first time. That happens to coincide with the November program with Kristallnacht, of course. So they go to Norway, they go to Iceland, they're going to France, back and forth. I mean, they're incredibly privileged in that way. They're always traveling, and he's writing as they travel. And then at the end, they're not traveling together because they've already more or less split up, which is quite clear. So he is giving many, many clues to his emotions, to how he feels and to how he responds. And it becomes much more explicit, much more personal, as the year moves on, as she's had her breakdown, which we can only presume has been a breakdown. Then, P appears a few more times, and he talks very much about how he is responding, and that comes through in the film too. Having the illness of someone one loves blows out the universe. I'm getting terribly behind in this project. So he's showing about how the impact on him emotionally and psychologically, and in terms of his ability to function, is being. He's being very candid about that, as candid as he allows himself to be. There's a constant negotiation within himself of how much he's going to give, of how much he's going to tell. For certain people, it's not enough, and for other people, like Virginia Woolf, it's too much already, because she sees it clearly as as another woman suffering from mental illness, who kind of feels protective, I guess, of Prudence, and who never really liked Peter very much, even though they're acquaintances. Says that, you know, he's got the wit of a bread knife. You know, she says really mean things about him. The only times she says, although they're getting together for lunch and they're meeting, so they're often, you know, she's not the kindest of critics of her friends in general, but yeah, she's constantly really kind of mean about him, and then she feels she's justified because he's been unfair to Prudence in this way. So yeah, so I think he's much more, and again, I think that's why I love the journal so much as a source, because it's a good reminder that this British stiff upper lip and all those kind of stereotypes of British emotionality or lack thereof are mythological. And that, you know, he's very in touch with his feelings, and in ways that are, you know, typical of their time, but he is not someone who is traditionally repressed or lacking the vocabulary and the ability to speak about his mental and sentimental life. He also talks a lot about the sensual effect and the way that, you know, this nervous state comes across in very physical medical terms as well, and his own body and how he feels, and how, you know, he talks about himself, I feel like a turned over tortoise, you know, he just can't, you know, he feels really trapped and powerless. And he talks about, you know, again, feelings of illness and sickness that come up as responses to political events, and of course to his wife's illness. So again, he's, I think he's such a great key, almost a dictionary of the emotional kind of, a lexicon of the period that we wouldn't otherwise have. Thank you.
Maybe also thank you very much from my side as well. I really enjoyed everything you said and the movie. And now I'm thinking, maybe it's too broad of a question, but as you did earlier research on anti-fascism, and now doing this, also thinking about this history of emotions, I'm thinking, to what extent have you been thinking about this with this history of anti-fascism that you have been researching for a long time in mind? To what extent are you tying it with it, thinking in these terms?
Thank you. That's a really, really interesting question, and I'm glad you asked it. So my interest in anti-fascism has been women's anti-fascism. Prudence, but you know, that is always part of a greater whole. Prudence doesn't seem political at all, so we can just put her, or at least, you know, she's not given any recognition for being particularly political. I wish there'd been bits and pieces in the journal that suggested she agreed with him, or she didn't, or they debated, or she was on message. I don't know. She doesn't seem to be a political or politicized figure. So it's his anti-fascism and how to situate it, how to place it, which I think, you know, the way that I said I started out feeling ambivalent, to say the least, about Peter as a human being and as in his character, and then I started to admire him more and more and more, because he does, and this is, you know, I think his greatest role in 1938 and in the late 30s in general is as a public intellectual. Even though he's a scholar and a critic, and you know, that's how he makes his living, how he makes his mark is as a public intellectual, and he's a really unique voice there as well. So I say that I've rediscovered Lucas. He's not been completely forgotten. Strikingly enough, there is an exceedingly long Wikipedia entry on Peter Lucas, on F.L. Lucas, which doesn't kind of, you know, make sense together with the way he's otherwise been kind of overlooked. He also has a fairly, you know, a fair length entry in the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography, which again is a marker of his prestige and his influence and his importance. The Wikipedia is much longer. And the same person who's put together that wiki was a former librarian at the Bodleian in Oxford, who I did correspond with a bit, and he tried to explain that he read Lucas as a student and he just always admired him. And then he went, and then he put together a compilation, a kind of an edited text of all Lucas's journalism on anti-fascism and appeasement. It's not published. It doesn't have an ISBN. It's available, but it's bound. I have one copy, which he kindly sent me, but he sent me the copy without his introductory essay. I don't know why, but I also read the introductory essay, which is really brilliant and incredibly informative. So I think he's already, but not by someone who has given him a further platform, sadly, but hopefully this will. He is being recognized, or he should be recognized, as a formidable and brave anti-fascist. He went against, one of the other things that I maybe picked that up in the film, even though he was kind of aligned in the outer circle of the Bloomsbury set, most of Bloomsbury were kind of pacifist. He was not a pacifist. He was he also was very, very anti-Soviet. So he was anti-extremism. He was anti-fascist and anti-Soviet. He just, he was he was a liberal. We don't know how he voted. He's not aligned, and he doesn't have party membership that he declares, but his anti-fascism is a liberal anti-fascism. And that is the least representative of all kind of anti-fascist kind of types, I suppose, in both in the literature but also in the action. So I think in that sense, he gives us he is, though, I think, a man of action as much as he can be. And so that has really, that has made me like him more and more and more when I can see the way that he is ready to call it. He is completely uninterested in what others think. He is, he's a man of conviction. And does, and a man of conviction ready to, put action behind his words too. So not a very fashionable type for that time or for ours, but he should be.
And it also seems like it adds up to some sort of emotional history of anti-fascism, which I think is quite cool.
Yeah. He despised the kind of the party line and that kind of, or he never talks about Orwell, and it's obviously before Animal Farmer in 1984. But and he and Orwell would have disagreed fundamentally in the late 1930s politically. But you have the value he places in the freedom of the mind is very Orwellian.
Maybe it would be interesting to hear something more about his work in Bletchley Park, because in Bletchley Park there met two different worlds. Worlds of intellectuals, university professors, freelancers, against a military structure and military directive who wants a result in months or two. Mm-hmm. And for me, it's somehow normal that half of these people there are approaching their own breakdown.
Right, yes, interesting. Yeah. I think that, I don't know enough about that, but I would say that he is such a hyper-productive man. Like, if you look at how much he publishes, we would all be put to shame. I mean, how quickly, how much. Like, within the year, just to the journal, he publishes 2 novels, 3 critical editions, a long essay, the diary, and in a play, it's just like never stops. So in terms of the pace that might be expected at Bletchley, he might have been right, just fine for that. Interestingly, at Bletchley, I think, as I say, he wasn't a pacifist. He thought this war had to be fought. He was determined to win it, and that was his contribution. And I think he was so driven by that. I assume he must have been so driven by that he would have never felt that was at all a repression of his kind of creative or intellectual freedom, but on the contrary. He also there would have been another emotional connection there. As it happens, his brother, who was 8 or 9 years younger than him, was at Bletchley with him, who was similarly a classicist. The Bletchley, they recruited a lot of classicists to Bletchley, because I guess there's an explanation of this, but the kind of the classical learning and the logic and all that was considered incredibly useful and relevant to code breaking. So he and his brother would have been there together. His brother, not only that, I discovered because I've done work at King's College where he was recently, and I've seen we talked about shared offices, right? Well, in Cambridge, people didn't usually share offices, but he and his brother were in the same rooms, like they had the same. So in 1938, he was actually sharing a room with his brother, who was also, as I say, a fellow classicist at Cambridge and a lecturer. One interesting thing about people being written out of the journal and how, to put Prudy's erasure in perspective, he's sharing a room with his brother. They work on the same kind of stuff. They're going to end up in Bletchley together. He's not mentioned once in the journal. So, it is quite possible that he didn't want it. There are very few people who are mentioned by name or in the journal. So he mentioned Stefan Zweig at some point, but Stefan Zweig never mentions him anywhere. So it's interesting that he's kind of name dropping here and there, I think. But people don't always drop his name with as much enthusiasm. So
I guess it's better to be P than nothing.
Exactly.
Yeah. Something else, maybe. Not any more questions?
I'm just.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question of the
Yeah,
audience? I mean,
yeah.
is there? Did you find any response to how easy or difficult it was to follow the story? Because of course it goes backwards and it's non-consecutive chronologically. Was it challenging to know where we were, and as historians, of course, we might not be as interested in the way the Gudrun play, but or is that was that easy?
For me, it's difficult to say because there were no subtitles, and I usually watch with subtitles, so I would have to see it again.
Okay.
This time. But it was not too difficult.
I was also thinking that subtitles might help a lot
Right.
because of the accent, and
Right.
since we are not natives, it's always a bit difficult to kind of decode certain words and so on.
English subtitles.
Yeah, English subtitles, yeah, of course. And for me, it was sometimes then I was trying to understand, and then the scene changed. So in this way, maybe it was a bit too fast, but then you explained it quite well before, so we kind of knew what to expect, and in this way it was much easier to maybe more concentrate on the feelings and everything, and the atmosphere, and not so much. Maybe that's the point,
Yeah, it wasn't meant to be. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it could have just been okay. Here, the play. Just to say, the play is much more kind of obvious, much more follows the journal and the chronological order of the journal. Again, it recreates her voice as much as we can, but ultimately, we start at such a date and we end at such a date. So they're two very different. Even though they're both called the nervous state, they're ultimately one grows out of the other, but they're ultimately completely different products.
Maybe if I can say, I would love to have more information about this Gudrun play, so I could place it better into the, because of course we don't, maybe the English audience will understand it?
No, it was again another one of his very obscure plays, although, he only wrote 2 plays, both of which were mentioned.
But does this play has a trigger in it?
For him, yeah.
Yeah, for him.
Yeah.
Did this play affected her also?
Well, she was meant to. He was trying to find another project they could work on together, so he gave her the opportunity to do the design, and ultimately she doesn't complete it because she's too ill. So that's the, and I guess again the Nicolo as playwright really understood the challenges that the playwright, one, because much of it is taken out of his hands by the director and the actor and so forth. But yes, and he mentions the Gudrun saga in a letter. So we also had archives from the Stockport Garrick, which has been this as I say, this amateur but permanent fixture theatre group, which has its own building and quite a big building actually. In Stockport, Stockport is just outside Manchester, just to let you know, it's like the next town over. And they have preserved their archive beautifully, and actually a lot of the letters, and when we see the secretary typing, those are from letters that they had preserved with correspondence between the company and Lucas. And he tells them in one of the letters that actually Gudrun meant so much to him that he took a copy of the Gudrun saga with him to the Somme, where he's badly injured in the war. He's gassed, and he does suffer problems with his lungs for the rest of his life. But so you know, the Gudrun saga is a symbolic shield for him, you know, during the First World War too. So you know, it has, and then of course it's this heroine, this, you know, and how much he associates Prudy with her, or Prudy associates herself, or there's a jealousy about her. So yeah, so that's the, yeah. But again, I'm not the writer, so I find that complicates things. But for Nicola, that's what it, that's the key for her. You know,
it's intriguing.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe if there are no other comments and questions, I would just like to thank you, Julie, for being here with us, and hopefully you will return with your newest research.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.